Grace and peace to you all, and welcome to the Calvary Road with Pastor Sam Allen.
You need to love them unconditionally and sacrificially. Then you need to plant the seed of truth in their hearts as often as God allows. You don't have to give them all of the word because no one will sit for that. But just when a question comes up or a situation occurs, just to say, you know, there's a proverb that addresses this very issue. If riches increase, don't set your heart upon it. It's just an example.
In today's broadcast, we have a new two-part study from Pastor Sam entitled Peter and Cornelius. We're in the 10th chapter of the book of Acts, and we will take up today in verse 17. Now, this study is going to take us to the end of chapter 10 as we look at two men, Peter and Cornelius, who are both responding to the promptings of God. Peter to go to Cornelius, and Cornelius to receive him. So, let's listen in.
I was thinking the other day about a song Eric Clapton did. It was called Change the World. Some of you are into music and you'll remember, others of you, well, listen, the idea is if we could just change the world, and who doesn't want to see the world improved? The problem with changing the world is, well, men's hearts have got to change. And I think the Beatles got real close. It's long before Eric sang Change the World, but they sang All You Need Is Love. And if they were talking about the love of God, which is pretty doubtful knowing their story, but had they been talking about the love of God, they would have had it completely. Yeah, if we could love unconditionally and sacrificially and in every situation, and if we could love, well, our families and our foes and our friends and our enemies, the way God tells us to, we could and would change the world. Well, Acts 10 records a major transformational event. It's both personal and cultural because Jesus is moving through Peter and the fellas to go beyond Jerusalem, beyond Judea, into Samaria, and now to Caesarea, which for them is the beginning of their mission to the uttermost parts of the world. It's interesting that God demonstrates, well, you would expect him to, perfect wisdom in this process. Jerusalem, that's sort of the hub. See, if you live there, it's like living at the beach. There's no beach there, but it's the same attitude because all there is if you live at the beach is the beach, and then there's inland. And no one wants to go inland, you know, unless you absolutely have to. And when you're in Jerusalem, you don't want to go to Judea. You don't want to go to the outskirts. It's always going down from there. It's a downer experience because Jerusalem is the hub. It's filled with the energy of God and the enthusiasm of the people of God, at least in that generation. So what's happening is he moves them from Jerusalem to Judea. That's their own brethren, but in the outskirts. Then to Samaria. Samaritans not really loved by most Jews. Why? They were half-breeds. They had intermarried after the Assyrian captivity, and so they had Abraham's blood flowing through their veins, but they had somebody else's too. And those Jews who prided themselves on keeping it in the family, literally, marrying within the 12 tribes originally, and then ultimately the 2 tribes that stayed in the south. Well, they just didn't think much of the Samaritans. You probably recall James and John offering, hey, give us the word, Lord, we'll fry these suckers for you. It's a rough paraphrase, but it is what they were offering to do. And the interesting thing is they knew the law. The law's an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You don't kill people for disrespecting you. That's gangster stuff, you see. And that's James and John, and they're not the only one with that attitude. Simon the Zealot, and I bet you anything, Peter, he just didn't, he was one of the few times they got it out before he could spit it out. And so the point is, they didn't really like the Samaritans, but God tells them, I want you to start here, then go to Judea, then to Samaria, then to the uttermost parts of the world. Well, listen, 10 years have passed since Pentecost, and they still haven't really reached out to the whole world. But God's going to take Peter, and again we see his wisdom in this. He was the guy, he was used in Acts chapter 2, there in Jerusalem. He's the guy that went out to Judea. He was used in Samaria, as we saw in our last study or two. And now God's going to take him up to minister to Cornelius. Now, their culture and ours, every culture, is a mere reflection of the attitudes and attributes, the ideas, the prejudices of its people. And you can't transform a culture without transforming the people. That should be a given. Our problem is, well, we try to transform people, but we work from the outside in. And what we end up doing is getting about, well, an inch deep in the whole thing. We can change the way they look and the way they talk. We can change the way they dress. But we can't change the part that needs to really change for them to be a new man or a new woman, a new boy or girl. And that's the heart. See, only God can change the heart of man. And he actually promises in the Old Testament to give a new heart, to replace the heart of stone with a heart of flesh that could receive his word and be in alignment with his heart for people. So we try to change people. We end up just working on the outside. When God changes people, he starts with the heart. So by the time people are talking different and dressing different and acting different, they really are different. And here's why this is so important. If you're raising children, and I know many of you are, or you're raising grandchildren or involved in the ministry here, or you're a big brother or sister, you got to know it's not just about getting those kids to act in a way that doesn't embarrass you here at church or in the restaurant or wherever you may be. You need to do what, well, all of us need to do. And that is, you need to first love those kids. Or, hey, it could be a spouse or a parent or someone who's a roommate or a friend. You need to love them unconditionally and sacrificially. Then you need to plant the seed of truth in their hearts as often as God allows. You don't have to give them all of the word, because no one will sit for that. But just when a question comes up or a situation occurs, just to say, you know, there's a proverb that addresses this very issue. If riches increase, don't set your heart upon it. It's just an example. I doubt that that's the one most of us have to worry about today. But the point is, there is a proverb or a word from God for everything. So we love on them and we plant the seed of truth in them, and then we just pray for them, because only God can change their hearts. And by the way, if you're not the same man or woman that you are here at church, when you're at work or when you're at home, then you need to really say, God, change my heart. We sing it, change my heart, oh God. Make it ever new. We need a change of heart if we're going to be truly transformed, if we're going to see our culture transformed. You know, the scriptures from the very mouth of our Lord, that God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. We often, and rightly so, focus on the gave his only Son part, but that whole God so loves the world, very important. Exceedingly important. And it's not a new revelation in John 3:16. No, from the very beginning, when God meets with Abraham in Genesis 12 and says, I want you to leave here and I want you to go there, and I'm going to give you a land, and I'm going to make you a great nation, and I'm going to make you a great name, and I'm going to bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And in you, he concludes, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Just in case we didn't get the in you, all the families or all the nations of the earth will be blessed. In Genesis 22:18, in your seed all the nations shall be blessed because you've obeyed my voice. Genesis 26:4, all the nations. Genesis 28:14, all the families. And then here's the clincher. Galatians 3:16. We start with John 3:16. We end up with Galatians 3:16. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say to seeds as of many, but as of one. And to your seed, who is Christ. How does God change the world? The only one who can change the world, he does it by loving them. And then planting the seed of truth in their hearts. And by the way, even praying for them. Jesus interceding even now for us and our loved ones and our enemies there at the throne of the Father. Well, Acts chapter 10 breaks down centuries of prejudice against the Gentiles as God changes how Peter sees them. He always starts with the man. Why? He deals with us one at a time. He changes us one at a time. We might meet and worship and study together, but he deals with us as individuals. And what happens is Jesus had already set an example. He spoke highly of Samaritans. We have the parable of the Good Samaritan. Listen, the Jews didn't have any parables of good Samaritans before Jesus came along. And then we have his care and concern for centurions. That's a Roman soldier. And when that centurion came to Jesus and said, I've got a servant who's sick, Jesus says, I'll come and heal him. He said, oh no, I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof. Just say the word and he'll be healed. I know you can do it. I'm a man under authority and I exercise authority. I say to this one, come, and he does, and that one go. And so he says, just say the word and I know he'll be healed. So Jesus speaks the word, heals the kid. And then he says, I've not found such great faith, no, not in all of Israel. Just that Jesus would make Gentiles the heroes in his stories and then minister to Gentiles in wonderful ways. He was setting an example. And then he tells them, of course, I want you to go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things I've commanded you. Well, we see the transition. We saw last time in the first part of Acts chapter 10, Peter lodging with Simon the tanner. Now, most of us would say, so what's the big deal? Tanning, not exactly something most Jews were into. Now, I'm not talking about laying out in the sun until you turn bronze or pink, as some of us do. But no, we're talking about something you do with animals that requires you to handle the dead animals. That wasn't something Jews did. In fact, some rabbis went so far as to say if a gal married a guy and then found out he was a tanner, she could divorce him. So you didn't really see a lot of Orthodox Jews hanging out in the house of a tanner. Some suggest this guy's a Gentile. That's certainly possible. If he's a Jew who's a tanner, that's a problem. If he's a Gentile who's a tanner, that's a double problem. But you see God breaking down Peter's prejudices. The second thing is he had a vision. We covered this last time. He'll readdress it, but I just want to review it briefly. A great sheet, or something like a great sheet, let down from heaven. In it, all sorts of food that just wasn't kosher. It wasn't on the Jews' diet. And as he looks at all of this stuff and wonders, what is this all about? The Lord says, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And Peter, as only Peter can, says, no way, Lord. I've never eaten anything unclean or uncommon. God's response to Peter, don't call what I've cleansed uncommon. Don't call what I've cleansed unclean. Now, Peter has no idea what this is about. But he's thinking, okay, food, but I don't really get why God's changing the whole thing. Check this out. I think this might be, because we know God's trying to change Peter's heart, right? Not his diet. This might be where that saying, that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach came from. I don't know for sure, but they used to say that back in Missouri when I lived there. And so maybe they say it out here too. But in any case, Peter is having a change of heart. He's gradually starting to see, okay, I can hang with a tanner. I like this guy. And then he has the vision and God's saying, hey, rise and kill and eat. And then as all of that's happening, as he's wondering what all this means, well, that's where we pick up in our story today, verse 17. While Peter wondered within himself what this vision which he'd seen had meant, behold, the men who had been sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate, and they called and asked whether Simon, whose surname was Peter, was lodging there. Now, what God did with Peter, and he does this with us, so I want to draw your attention to it. He gave him a vision. He told him in part its meaning, but he didn't explain it fully. It won't really crystallize or make total sense till he gets into the house of Cornelius. And there, we'll see and read it together, that he puts it all together. He understands. And there have been so many times in my life where God has shown me something or spoken something to me, and I didn't fully grasp its meaning or its significance. But down the road, I'm like, oh, now I see what you were doing, Lord. Now I see why you told me to go there or do that, or why you said don't go there anymore and don't do that anymore. Now I understand what you intended all along. That's what's happening with Peter. I don't know if you're aware of it. When Billy Graham first went to Russia, and most of you at least have heard of Billy Graham, right? I mean, just his son Franklin will keep his name alive. But he's still alive, and he's getting up there in age. He's a guy I'd love to hang out with because I'd feel young around him. But anyway, he went to Russia, and a lot of Christians in America were very upset. Why? He was going to preach to the evil empire. That's what President Reagan called him. By the way, he wasn't far off. It wasn't all the people, you see, but the empire itself was evil, was set on the destruction and the manipulation and the coercion. And well, they abused and used their own people to their own ends. And so the whole thing is, when he was going there, people are like, I can't believe Billy's going. Hey, if anyone needed the gospel, it was the evil empire. It was kind of like when Jonah went to Nineveh. The difference was Jonah didn't want to go. Billy wanted to go. And he went because he knew, hey, it's dark there and desperate and people need the hope of the gospel. I remember that we fought, though it happened before my time, against both the Germans and the Japanese in world wars. But you know, I look in our parking lot and we got a lot of Toyotas out there and a few Lexuses. And well, we got some what did the Germans make? Mercedes and Audis, right? And all those things. And then I was going to say Beamers, but that's like Bavarian, right? Bavarian. How weird is that? But anyway, I digress. So my point is, you know, they were our enemies. Now we're driving their cars. You know, Russia was our enemy. Now we're working with them to try to deal with new enemies. And the point is, the political deal, well, it's its own world. But as people change, as hearts are changed, as individuals change, and families change, and cities change, and the culture changes. And by the way, it's God has called us to impact our culture, to be the real deal wherever we are in a society where the majority of people claim to be Christian. I'm thinking if really everyone who said they were a Christian acted like a Christian, well, we'd be safe in the streets. I mean, we would recognize the people who are dangerous immediately. We would be, well, all sorts of things that happen just wouldn't be happening. Because the majority would say, well, there's no way God would approve or authorize that. If all of the people in California who say they're Christians were Christians, we would elect Christians to Congress. And if the whole country did that and we had a whole Christian Congress, well, some people say, well, I don't even think that's a good idea. Well, you should rethink that, because no one could do worse than the people up there now. And if you're saying, are you really saying, Pastor, you think we'd do better if we had an all-Christian Congress? Am I? Why not? Are you kidding me? People that would vote not just based on what's going to get me reelected or help people be prosperous, but what's going to be right and just and holy. And that never seems to even enter into the discussion. If it does, it's behind closed doors because I'm not hearing it. And so my point is, if we're going to change the world, we need to change. That's really what it comes down to. And that's what's happening here. God is changing Peter, and he's going to change the Jewish culture, who's going to have some real problems with the change. Don't want to spoil it for you, but read ahead and later check out Acts 15. Don't skip over to it, but read later, all the way to Acts 15 at least. And you're going to see that there were a lot of people that came to the Lord, and they're like, okay, this is all good, but I still don't think they could come. And if they do, they got to come and do it our way. And well, we'll get there when we get there. As Peter thought about the vision, verse 19, the Spirit said to him, and this is so important, behold, 3 men are seeking you. Arise, therefore, go down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. God tells Peter, these guys are going to come and make a request. I want you to heed it. I don't want you to worry about it. Don't doubt about it. Just do it. And he knows it's the Lord's instruction, see. So Peter went down to the men who'd been with him from Cornelius, or sent to him from Cornelius, and he said, "Yes, I'm whom you seek. For what reason have you come?" They said, "Cornelius, the centurion, a just man, one who fears God, has a good reputation among all the nation of the Jews, was divinely instructed by a holy angel to summon you to his house, to hear words from you." And he invited them in and lodged them. And on the next day, Peter went away with them, and some brethren from Joppa accompanied him. Here's the third stage in Peter's transformation, at least as we see him opening his heart to the Gentiles. We see him housing Gentiles. Those words where it says that he lodged them suggest more than he gave them a place to stay. And he's going to say so when he gets to the house of Cornelius. Now, he was beginning to fellowship with people that earlier in his life, he would have said, "There is no way you're going to catch me with those people." And whoever those people might be, if there are any of them in your life, you really need to think it through. And I have to do the same thing so that I can make sure my heart is aligned with the heart of God, who sent Jesus, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Well, the following day we read, they entered Caesarea, verse 24, and Cornelius was waiting for them and had called together his relatives and close friends. And as Peter was coming in, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshiped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Stand up. I myself am also a man." Three things about Cornelius that are important to us today. First of all, he was religious and respected, and we know he gave alms and he cared for the poor and that he prayed. But unlike many religious people today, he knew all of that still left him wanting. Something was still lacking. He didn't know what it was. He just knew there had to be something else. He understood that all his good works could not amount to a righteousness that would make him acceptable to God. But God was paying attention. And here's a guy seeking after the Lord with all his heart. And God promised, if anyone seek after me with all his heart, he will find me. So he knows he's not righteous. And I hope today, if you're a religious person and you found your way into our midst, you do the right things, you try not to do the wrong things. When you do the wrong things, you try to atone for them or make up for them in some way. If that describes you, if you're respected and honored by people who, if you were to ask them or I were to ask them, they'd say, "Oh, they've got to be a Christian. They're living it." If that's you, but you know in your heart of hearts you've never been born again of his Spirit, then you're like Cornelius. You're far above the average person, but you're still in need of the forgiveness and the transformation that can only come when God takes control of your life and gives you that heart of flesh, replacing the heart of stone.
In Matthew chapter 10, verses 29 and 30, we read the words of Jesus saying, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered." Well, the Lord's point was to show how valuable we are to God, but this verse also reminds me of just how involved in our everyday lives and in the ways of the world that God really is. I think about Peter's meeting with Cornelius. While God sends an angel to instruct Cornelius to seek out Peter, at the same time God is giving Peter a vision which will prepare him for his meeting with Cornelius. I believe that this happens much more often than we are aware. Many times when God puts a certain person on your heart for you to minister to pray for, to seek out, He is at the same time moving on that person's heart as well. What I find even more fascinating is that God knows we will not always respond as we should. God knows exactly what we will do and what we won't do, yet He prepares us and calls us anyhow. Personally, I learn a lot from the times God has called me to act and I did not. And one of the things I learn the most is how much I wish I would have acted, and how much more ready I am to act when the opportunity to serve comes upon me again. The Calvary Road is a ministry of Calvary Chapel Chico, and you can visit our website, ccchico.com, or download the CC Chico app to contact us and listen to other studies from Pastor Sam. You can also listen to The Calvary Road as a daily podcast by visiting thecalvaryroad.com. We'd love to hear from you, and until next time, may you find grace and peace as your journey takes you down the Calvary Road.
And your grace